Hey everyone, before this video begins, I just want to share some awesome news. I am now a writer over at RT.com and it seems I'll be there for the foreseeable future. This video is actually based off my very first article for the site, so if you want to read that or any of my other work, please check the links in the description of this video. It'll help me a ton if you throw some clicks that way. Thank you.
Would you date a trans person, honestly? Think about it for a second. Okay, got your answer? Well, if you said no, I'm sorry, but that's pretty discriminatory.
Trans activists have lost the plot. Every day, an increasing amount of absurdity floods in as they do more harm than good. They scream for acceptance without realizing that the ones damaging their image aren't bigots, but themselves. From anger directed at celebrities for the rational belief that parents shouldn't decide whether their 3-year-old is trans, to a culture of outrage that freaks out at the most minor of offenses. Transgender activists have become detrimental to mine and others' very existence. Not helping matters is the fact that these people are laying bombs within our language in the hope they trigger so they themselves can become triggered. Saying transgendered with an ED at the end instead of transgender can get you labeled as transphobic, as can saying trans woman instead of trans woman, notice the space. This is a linguistic minefield with the sole intent of catching people off guard, and those who are caught in its blast are branded as bigots. This concept is nonsensical, as it's one thing to correct someone who made a grammatical mistake, but another thing altogether to get outright offended when someone makes a simple grammatical error, and that's what is occurring. A turn of events which only pushes people away as no one wants to associate with a group of people who become so easily upset. Hampering things even further is the fact that the once radical portion of the left has seemingly taken control, and now no one can speak up lest they become a target for the vitriol and abuse of which this conglomerate is composed. How do I know? Because I'm a trans person myself, and my reward for speaking with rationality is to be labeled a self-loathing, boot-licking, trans-misogynistic turf. And if I can be labeled a transphobe, then your normal human being doesn't stand a chance. Especially in an era when people are pushing an agenda that suggests you better suck dick, or you're a bigot. I desperately wish I was making that last bit up. In late August, journalist, or let's be real, outrage merchant, Anna Valens went on a tirade over at the Daily Dot about how it was transphobic to decline sex with a trans person on the basis that they are trans. Likewise, recently, women's competitive cyclist Rachel McKinnon made multiple claims that are outright audacious. In one instance, she said genital preferences are transphobic. And in another, she boldly expressed that any sexual orientation other than pansexuality is immoral. Hear that, straight people? You're going straight to hell. The media warned us that the recent release of Joker was going to lead to an incel uprising, but I don't think they meant it quite like this.
Well, a women's shelter in Anchorage, Alaska may have to close its doors because it wants to admit only women who are in fact biologically female. The Hope Center is currently being investigated by the city of Anchorage for allegedly violating the city's transgender non-discrimination law. In response to this, the center has sued. They say the law infringes on religious freedom. Kate Anderson is senior counsel to the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Trans people want all the compassion and acceptance in the world, yet in many cases they're not willing to be equally as understanding. Last year, the flames of fury flared up when a woman named Christy Hanna filed a human rights complaint against a women's shelter after she was forced to share a room with a transgender woman in Toronto. Many people took this story at face value and levied all sorts of hate at her, but the actual situation was more complex. Hannah was a rape victim, and her roommate was a pre-op trans woman who wasn't yet far enough into their transition to be passable or even fully presentable. As was described by Miss Hannah, her roommate was male-bodied with facial and chest hair. No, maybe it's because I'm a rape victim myself, but I too would be triggered by sharing a room with a complete stranger who looks like a man. I don't care what they identify as. In regards to Christy Hanna, that's exactly what happened. As was reported by the National Post, the sharing of the room with someone who looked like a man caused her stress, anxiety, rape flashbacks, symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and sleep deprivation. When she reported this to the shelter staff, they offered to move her to a new room, but it lacked a door, therefore allowing no privacy, so she left the shelter altogether. Yet to the trans community, none of that mattered, and Christy was raked over the coals. Even I was attacked for trying to defend her. Worse still is the fact that shelters which exclude trans women are now being vandalized. Never mind that they still help women who need it.
House bills itself as a gentle haven of healing and a safe haven for single homeless women. But a new lawsuit says it put a lot of women in harm's way in a very vulnerable spot, the shower. says the shelter requires them to shower in groups, and it opened its doors to a purported transgender who made lewd and sexually inappropriate comments and leered at them while they were naked.
To the petulant children who make up what I call the pronoun police, all they can think of is their own selfish and self-centric worldviews. Few in this community, to which I've been forcefully tied to, seem to have any basic understanding of the various reasons why our presence may be triggering to some, especially in a woman's shelter that houses rape victims. It shouldn't take a big brain to see why a male-looking individual with a floppy penis may not be the best fit. A fact of reality is that I was born a boy. Even now, post-hormone replacement therapy, I have masculine traits that will never go away. When I die, if far off into the future I'm dug up, my bones will have archaeologists pegging me as a male, not a female. I bring that analogy up because many trans people seem to deny they were born as the gender opposite of what they identify as. But I am not 100% female, and I never will be. I'll never have a period, although some smooth-brained idiots like to argue that some women have issues that prevent them from having periods. So does that mean you're saying they're not women too? No, that's not what that means. It means I have a dick and no potential even exists for me to have a period. Because unlike biological women who may have conditions that affect how their bodies work, they still have the proper bodies of the sex it happens to be. I don't. My chromosomes are XY and I was born a boy. I'll never have to worry about cervical cancer, though when I'm older, I will want to have my prostate checked. None of this means that trans people shouldn't be respected as the gender they present themselves as. We are anomalies in that our brain for some reason developed on a course which differs from what our chromosomes dictate. And I'm not going to call being trans a mental illness, but it is an issue that stems from the brain. Even scans of that organ reveal people like me have brains more closely resembling the gender we present ourselves as, and due to that, I'm a proponent of supporting transitioning. But that comes with some caveats. I, for one, don't think trans women should be competing against cis women in competitive sports. At least, not outside of specialized leagues where everyone consents to trans women being allowed. In normal sports, we are seeing trans people destroy records in track, weightlifting, and other events, and that is not fair to biological females. I'm opposed to letting kids take various meds too. By all means, if your child is trans, it's for the best to support and love them. But growing up is confusing time, and it may not be a good idea to let them begin a full-on transition. Not when these meds have permanent consequences. These days, it's simply too easy to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and I fear the repercussions.
They're a sister.
How come it changed?
Because I wanted to be a boy.
Okay.
I have no doubt in my mind that soon enough we will have teens and adults stepping forward who are convinced they were trans at a young age, only to grow up and realize they aren't. Some boys are just effeminate and some girls are just a bit masculine, but today society is going out of its way to tell them they're trans. A scary thought for a community that seems to already run on fear. In 2017, the Southern Poverty Law Center sent out a tweet linking to an article about transgender hate murders. In a follow-up tweet, they listed names of all the people who had been murdered that year. The placement of the names below an article about hate murder seems to imply all the listed names were the victims of hate crimes. As is so often the case, that isn't true. Of the names listed, 3 stand out: Sean Hake, Kiwi Herring, and Scout Schultz. What's important about these people is that they were not killed for anything related to their gender identities. All 3 people were shot by police in different states after charging at law enforcement with knives. That same year, multiple non-trans people were killed by police for the very same reason. Yet the trans individuals' details are tallied and used as examples of a rising trend in the murder of transgender people, a trend that has been occurring for a few years. What's most disingenuous is that in most cases, there's little to no proof that their murders are linked to their status of being trans. Some are sex workers in dangerous areas where cis women are also found murdered each year, or they're victims of normal everyday violence. It sucks, but a lot of people just happen to get shot in the United States, and for a myriad of reasons. Just this year, Claire Legato, a trans woman in Ohio, was shot dead after her mother got into an altercation with a man in their yard about an issue relating to theft. Jordan Coffer, also from Ohio, was tragically killed when a gunman went on a mass shooting in Dayton. These 2 deaths are included on the Human Rights Campaign's list of violence against the transgender community. The list ends with this sentence: HRC has been tracking reports of fatal anti-transgender violence for the past few years. Anti-transgender violence? Weird. I didn't know the Dayton, Ohio gunman did all that for a single person. Even in cases where a transgender person kills themselves, if an agenda can be pushed, this community will immediately take a still warm corpse and bludgeon people with it. Recently, comedian and actress Daphne Dorman took her own life. She was cited by Dave Chappelle in his most recent Netflix stand-up as the person who was laughing the hardest at his trans jokes. In case you're unaware, this is the stand-up special that caused many in the media to cry foul and call Chappelle transphobic. Daphne, on the other hand, thought he was hilarious and would go on to tweet in support of her friend. Her words don't matter anymore though, because now that she can't defend herself, her existence has been retconned and it is now Dave Chappelle's fault she died. A frankly just sickening and frustrating turn of events, although it is one that makes sense when you look a bit deeper. In 2017, at the HRC National Dinner, President Chad Griffin gave an eye-opening speech. He began by thanking Hillary Clinton, who had a speaking role that year, before then immediately emphasizing how things for LGBT individuals were much brighter under Obama. This is important because the HRC is a major supporter of Democratic candidates and politicians. He eventually went on to discuss HRC Rising, or what he labeled as the single largest grassroots expansion in the organization's history. This was important to him, as he proceeded to say,
"It's critical that we organize and mobilize the 10 million LGBTQ voters in this country, which, by the way, is a voting bloc that's larger than the margin of victory of every presidential election since 1984.
For a couple years now, the speech hasn't sat well with me. I look at our media landscape and watch as fear-mongering rules the day. A narrative has been created which paints anyone on the right as a hateful bigot and has gay and trans people fearful that they are going to die. Trans lists overconflate and simplify the reasons people are murdered. Comedians are blamed for suicides that have nothing to do with anything they've done. And anyone who so much as questions the absurdity of what's happening is torn down and labeled every negative thing that'll stick. Why this keeps happening is clear. An environment has been created that is pushing people to conform to a particular mindset by brute force scare tactics, and this is inevitably convincing them to vote a certain way. The left is ruling by division and fear. Browse social media and the trans death stat is cited ad nauseum. These people legitimately believe they are going to die. All the while, the actual issues that caused those deaths aren't being discussed. Inner city crime and prostitution are big factors, as is poor mental health. I mean, sane people don't go charging at police with knives. Yet those issues don't get blamed, nor are they being adequately discussed. Daphne Dorman, in these people's eyes, didn't join the 41% because she has deep-rooted issues. No, it's Chappelle's fault, it's the right's fault, it's the bigots' fault. And as a right-leaning individual myself who also happens to be trans, I know this to be false. I'm embraced by my community. They aren't transphobic, they don't want me dead, they just have issues with much of the same stuff I do. A lot of trans people call me a self-loather, but I don't loathe myself, nor do I loathe the fact that I'm trans. I just loathe the community I've been forcefully grouped into, and I think it's understandable why a lot of other people do too. Trans people and their allies are now their worst enemies. But unlike them, I refuse to shoot myself in the foot. As an independent content creator, I need all the help I can get to grow my channel. So if you like my work, please leave a thumbs up on this video, subscribe to my channel, maybe drop a comment below, join my Discord, and if you want to support what I do, please check the description for ways to donate.